The first time I ever heard anybody talk about a race war in this country, it came from the writings of Thomas Sowell. I was reading one of his columns and there was the headline about race war. I thought, well, I never really considered whether there was a race war between black people and white people in this country, but I admired Dr. Sowell so much I thought I'd give it a read. Reading, get down a few paragraphs, and he goes, paraphrasing, and if you have any doubt about whether there's a race war on, you should read the books by Colin Flaherty. Wow. And that really made me, think, and it really made me start connecting the dots a lot more about this whole idea of a race war. I mean, we document the black on white violence here, we document the black on white hostility, but it's really across a whole range of areas, right? Let's put aside the crime for a minute. What about the military academies? They teach white privilege at the military academies. What about the EPA? For 8 years, we heard about environmental racism. What about Obama's attorney general? For 8 years, we learned that there are too many black people in prison for no reason whatsoever, parentheses, except for white racism. I mean, this just goes on top to bottom. This was a group that looked at everything, not just through the lens of race, but through the lens of racial hostility. I mean, there's no, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it a war, you want to call it a low-intensity war, whatever military term you want to use, there's no doubt something is very strange going on in the country. There's also no doubt that if there is a war, and there is a war, the people on the front lines who are experiencing this war every day are cops. I mean, every day we see cops that are subject to harassment, threats, taunting, defiance, violence, and murder every day. I think that's why so many cops watch this channel, so many cops send me emails, so many cops send me stories, because they know that I'm telling the story that they could tell if they weren't carrying a lunch bucket to work every day, and if they didn't have a family to support, and if they didn't know they'd be fired if they ever started talking about this stuff in public. Well, so why don't we take a look at a couple recent examples of black on cop violence, along with somebody who has taken a stand in the proxy war on cops. I mean, the whatever the black on white war is, there's no doubt in my mind that the cops, the violence directed at cops and the hostility and suspicion directed at cops is a proxy war for the race war. And there's one guy that has stood up for a long time for the cops, and now he's actually in a position to do something about it. Why don't we start in Charlottesville?
A grand jury has indicted a man from Charlottesville on the charge of attempted capital murder of a police officer, among other charges. The charges against 26-year-old Joshua Carter stem from an incident that happened near the intersection of 11th Avenue Northwest and Grady Avenue on November 13th last year. On that evening, a woman called Charlottesville police to say Carter shot at her daughter, giving his name and a full description. 2 officers found Carter behind a parked vehicle, and witnesses say they heard him being told to show his hands. The officers shot him after he fired multiple times at one of them.
Let's head over to the Bronx. This video, there's not much in this video that we can tell what's going on, but what happened was they were some black person was going crazy. Cop tried to stop him. He tried to run the cop over at one spot. He actually hit the cop with his car, and when they did stop him, he rammed his car into a cop car. So this is direct violence against cops in the Bronx. If you've ever been to Charlottesville, where a lot of stories coming out of Charlottesville and the University of Virginia, that story is surprising to me because Charlottesville used to be one of those bucolic college towns in the middle of nowhere where you could, go to school. A lot of people like retiring to these towns because everything's very placid and peaceful and easy to live there. Not so much in Charlottesville anymore. But anyway, let's get to a guy who's decided to choose sides in this proxy war against cops. The President of the United States, Donald Trump.
You are the role models to young Americans all across this country, many of whom want to go into law enforcement, many of whom want to be a sheriff or a police chief, many of whom. They have great respect for you, tremendous respect. You don't even realize it, but I will. They have great respect and admiration for the people in this room and the people that you represent. And don't let anyone ever tell you different. Don't let the dishonest media try and convince you that it's different than that, because it's not.
It's easy to forget what the stakes are in this war. I mean, if the cops go away, or if the cops decide they're going to stop arresting people, which they actually are doing in lots and lots of places, well, I mean, the cops go away, the blue line goes away. What's separating us from the chaos and the violence and the mayhem? Nothing. That already exists in a lot of parts of this country. So here's a story out of Cleveland State University. When you see it like this, just written as a campus safety alert, where people send these out, as text messages, it doesn't seem, that bad. 5 black people are walking through the campus of Colorado State University. They had guns, held up some people, took their phones, beat the hell out of them. Okay, it's a big world. That's a small incident, especially when you look at it like this. But here's pretty much the same thing. It's pretty much the same day. Happened in Brooklyn. These are all recent. A bunch of black people walking by in Brooklyn. See some white guy walking on the street in Brooklyn. Beat the hell out of him. Rob him. It's a little different when you're not just talking about a text message, but we're actually looking at real violence. Whenever I hear all this stuff against Trump, that he's a bad person, and all the stuff people say about him, I know they're not really talking about Trump, but they're talking about people like you and people like me, people who are Trump supporters, people who have some hope for Trump to make America great again, to bring this country back, to do whatever he said he was going to do. And so when they're jumping on Trump, Trump's not the target. We are. Especially people like us who are looking at these videos, especially people who are a lot less willing now to kind of ignore a lot of this racial hostility and racial violence. The people who are looking at connecting the dots, making the connections. I mean, look at this thing from Cleveland State University. This is the same place that just had these 5 black guys rolled through the campus. It's not the first time students of Cleveland State University have been the victims of black mob violence, black on white crime, wildly out of proportion. Not the first time. Google it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Even so, the university, very, very eager to put on the Diversity and Inclusion Week coming up during Valentine's Day week, during Black History Month. The flip side of every single one of these diversity and inclusion celebrations is the central, well, it's not even a flip side, it's really kind of the central organizing feature. And that is, black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. That's why you have to do things like put on diversity and inclusion weeks. To kind of brag about how, you're so far ahead of the curve on racial quotas, affirmative action, dropping scores to let black people into your school, dropping hiring standards to make sure a certain number of black people are hired in your firm or at your TV station. That's hostility. That's racial hostility. Why don't we get back to racial hostility in more concrete forms, some of the nastier forms, the more sinister forms. Here's a story. Here's a couple of stories about black on senior violence.
This 75-year-old man from Maysville, Kentucky is just starting to recover from all of those injuries you can see right there after being beaten and left for dead. The man accused of attacking him is now facing charges, and tonight the victim's family is talking only with Fox 19 Now about what happened. Jessica Schmidt is live tonight with this update you will only see right here on Fox 19 Now. Jessica, this sounds horrible.
It is really a devastating story, Tricia. So we are live here outside of the McDonald's in Maysville, Kentucky, and police say it's here that a 25-year-old man brutally beat a 75-year-old man. He's, I'm told, a well-known face in this community, a friendly face in this community. So now the victim's family and friends are telling us they cannot believe this happened here in this tight-knit community. Like clockwork, 75-year-old Kenneth Throckmorton comes to this McDonald's in Maysville every Sunday to socialize. You can see here, this past Sunday was no different.
He knows everybody, and if he doesn't know you, he will before he leaves.
Around 6:30, Throckmorton went to the bathroom. This man, who police now say is 25-year-old Brandon Dawson, went in after him. Throckmorton, cane in hand, says he asked Dawson to help him take his coat off. He wasn't expecting Dawson's reaction.
And he was waylaid and just beat to a pulp. What would make someone so mean and hateful that they would do that to an elderly person?
This security video footage then shows Dawson heading out the door.
He didn't have a care in the world, did he? It's ridiculous. Someone could do that and then just walk out like nothing happened.
Dudley and Debbie Bowling say they were there when the restaurant managers found Throckmorton and yelled out for help.
Pretty devastating to see him in the condition that he was in, and he was bleeding profusely.
It was very devastating to just know that, you know, this poor man, he just wanted somebody to help him.
With a broken right hip, fractures in his face, and bleeding in his brain, Throckmorton is at the hospital starting a long road to recovery, but the community is already right behind him.
It's literally the conversation all over town here, and Kenny has support from everybody.
They're seeking justice for what they're calling Dawson's violent, senseless, and despicable act. Now, Dawson is being charged now with second-degree assault. Now, he was booked into jail earlier today, but according to the jail website, he has since been released. It's not clear right now when he will appear in court.
Here's one out of St. Paul. 76-year-old woman sexually assaulted while out on a walk. Most of the times they don't identify the race to the assailant. Maybe in St. Paul and Minneapolis they're getting a little nauseous, they're getting a little fatigued at all this black on white crime. Oh, you didn't know the Twin Cities were an epicenter of black on white crime, black mob violence? It is. Well, we got to go to the story in the New York Daily News, if for no other reason than the picture. Here's a story about a bunch of seniors and a guy in a wheelchair are part of victims, a part of black people in some kind of violent mugging streak throughout the city. All the suspects are black. Who's holding the knife? The white guy. If you want some details, here they are. I mean, sometimes people say, Colin, you're always telling the same story. Yeah, I said that at the beginning of this whole exercise. That the challenge here is it's always the same story. We're just telling it a million different ways because that's how many different ways this black on white violence and hostility is manifest to us. Here's just one more, so here we're looking at a couple different ways, right? We're not just looking at the black people who went and attacked seniors and attacked a guy in a wheelchair. We're looking at a photo editor who said, wow, I guess it's time we put a fictional white guy with a knife in our stories so we can pretend that white people are doing it too. That's a lie, born of racial hostility. Head on out to Columbus, Ohio. Same thing. Little place called German Village. Residents aren't in. That's because, in German Village, well, things like that don't happen here, but they certainly do now. A whole bunch of black people are cruising through German Village, beating the hell out of people, robbing them, stabbing, beating them. Everybody feels unsafe. That doesn't happen in German Village, does it? So when we look at this black on white crime and violence, black on Asian, black on young, black on old, black on gay, black on straight, black on Asian, black on Amish, every single bit of it wildly out of proportion when we look at this. And when we look at the number of reporters and public officials or in denial, deceit, and delusion about it, what are we supposed to call this relentless hostility and violence so wildly out of proportion? What do we call it? I think I'll stick with Thomas Sowell. call it a race war being conducted by black people on basically every other race in the country. Of course, from the trolls, all we hear is A, it's not happening, B, white people do it too, C, white people deserve it. Take your choice. I really don't care. Even if it makes a few black kids angry.